Today, we are diving into what you could almost call the ultimate spiritual software update. We're going to unpack Hebrews chapter 8, and this is a chapter that basically argues the old system of connecting with God, well, it had a critical flaw, and a radical new one had to be rolled out. But that brings up a huge question, right? If the original plan from God was perfect, why on earth would it need a replacement? That's really the central tension of this whole chapter. And the answer, as we'll see, lies in understanding the difference between a blueprint and the actual final building. All right, let's start our tour. Our first stop isn't here on Earth. No, we're going to the heavens, where we meet a new kind of high priest whose location, well, it changes the entire game. So verse 1 just drops the mic right away. It says, here's the main point. We have a high priest who is seated. Now, this is a huge deal. See, earthly priests, they never sat down. Their work of sacrifice was never, ever finished. But this priest is seated right next to God, the ultimate position of power, which signals that the final, decisive sacrifice has been made. The work is done. It's finished. Then, verse 2 tells us where he's serving. And it's not in some man-made temple on earth. He's ministering in the true tabernacle. The real deal, the divine original in heaven that the earthly temple was just, well, it was just a sketch of. He's serving in reality, not the shadow. Okay, so verse 3 is pretty straightforward. It just reminds us of the priest's basic job description. You offer gifts and sacrifices. That's what you do. So it follows that this new high priest must also have something to offer. But what do you offer in a heavenly temple where animal sacrifices are, they're obsolete? The offering has to be something completely different, something infinitely better. And verse 4 points out this really critical detail. See, on earth, you had to be from the tribe of Levi to be a priest. That was the rule. Jesus wasn't. So under that old system, he was actually disqualified from the job. This is a massive clue that his priesthood operates under a completely different and totally superior system. So you have this core contrast, right? The shadow versus the reality that's casting it. The entire earthly system was the shadow, and now let's see how the text itself describes this relationship. Verse 5 just makes it crystal clear. The earthly services were literally a copy and shadow of the heavenly things. Remember, Moses was told to build the earthly tabernacle according to a divine pattern. It was a physical model of a spiritual reality. Think of it like a photograph of a person. It represents them, sure, but it's not the actual person. And all of this brings us to the big pivot point in verse 6. Because the priest is better and the location is better, the ministry itself is more excellent. He's the go-between, the mediator of a better covenant that's built on better promises. And this is where we really get to the core of this whole upgrade. So we've seen the superior priest and his superior location. Now let's zoom in on the superior promise that he brings. What exactly makes this new agreement, this new covenant, so much better? Verse 7 just lays out some simple logic for us. Look, if the first agreement had been flawless, nobody would have been looking for a second one. I mean, it's common sense, right? The very fact that a new covenant even exists implies there was a problem with the old one. So where was the flaw? Well, verse 8 tells us God found fault with them, with the people. The law itself, the rules, that wasn't the problem. The problem was humanity's inability to actually follow it. It was a user error issue, not a hardware issue. And so God announces a plan for a completely new covenant. Now, verse 9 draws a really sharp contrast. God says this new deal will not be like the old one, where he took them by the hand to lead them, but they didn't continue in it. They let go. That first agreement was all based on external rule following, and it just didn't work. It was a relationship that broke down. And then verse 10, wow. It reveals the very heart of the new covenant, and it is a radical, radical shift. It's not about external rules on stone tablets anymore. It's about an internal transformation. God says he will put his laws in their minds and write them on their hearts. Let's break down exactly what that means. Here's the four-step promise. First, the law becomes something we intuitively understand, placed right in our minds. Second, it becomes something we want to do, our actual desire, because it's written on our hearts. And this incredible internal change leads to the third and fourth points, the full restoration of a personal relationship where God says, I will be their God, and they will be my people. Verse 11 shows us the amazing results of this internal change. Knowing God is no longer a second-hand thing, something taught to you by a neighbor or a priest. Instead, all shall know me, from the least important to the most important. It's a promise of direct, personal access to God for everyone, no more middlemen. And finally, verse 12 reveals what powers this entire new system: radical, absolute forgiveness. God declares, "I will be merciful, and their sins I will remember no more." And that's not just a pardon, it's a promise to completely erase the record of everything they've ever done wrong. And this is the crucial difference. The old system, it could only cover up sins temporarily, like putting a fresh coat of paint over a stain. But the new covenant offers a forgiveness so complete, it's as if the sins never even happened. The record isn't just archived somewhere, it's deleted. The slate is truly permanently wiped clean. So, this all leads us to the final, logical conclusion. If this new covenant is so much better, what happens to the old one? Well, the chapter gives us a very definitive answer. Before we read the last verse, let's just lock in one key word: obsolete. It means out of date, replaced by something newer and way more effective. Think of a flip phone in the age of smartphones. It still technically works, but it's been superseded. Okay, with that in mind, listen to this final verse. And there it is, verse 13, the final verdict. By introducing a new covenant, God himself rendered the first one obsolete. The text says it's growing old and ready to vanish away. So it wasn't violently torn down or destroyed. It simply faded away as the new, brighter, and permanent reality took its place. And that leaves us with this powerful question to think about. If that old shadow system has vanished, how do we fully live in the reality of this new, internal, and direct covenant today? That is the real-world application of this ultimate spiritual upgrade. Thanks so much for joining this explainer.